Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Blackberry Pie Wash Process Colombia from House of Funk. And there's the bottle right there. And I'll go ahead and take you around the bottle as well, as I really like the artwork. House of Funk, based out of North Vancouver, British Columbia, and they're a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel one time before when we reviewed one of their more experimental processed coffees, and it was after that review I kind of made it a point to go back and try one of their more standard offerings, as I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of that coffee. However, they're a coffee roaster that has definitely caught my interest, as they're one I very much want to go visit next time I am out in Vancouver. As for anybody that does not know, they're both a coffee roaster as well as a brewery. They were a brewery first, and then they decided to open up a coffee program. And I would say that it's a very interesting coffee program, given that they have so many experimental coffees that they do offer. And when I was looking at their coffees, this was one of the few more standard coffees, and it felt like a safer bet. So I'm looking forward to discussing this coffee, as this right here is day 34. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. However, I went 1 to 2 notches more coarse with it, and we'll get into that a little bit later throughout this video. Roast profile is interesting. It's definitely significantly lighter than a majority of what I've had from Canadian coffee roasters. Roast profile reminds me a little bit of fried hats. This coffee reminded me a lot of fried hats in a couple of senses, so we'll get into that a little later as well. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 18, first impression. The coffee was really bright and acidic. So I ran this through the V60, correction, I ran it through the Chemex from that first try, and I would say that it didn't necessarily leave the best first impression, as there were so many citric and tart aspects right from the start of the cup, with a slight bit of this nutty aroma that was ever so slightly present in the cup itself. So I'm thinking, okay, this is very much in line with a pretty standard Colombian that may be a little light roasted. So it left an okay first impression, but this is kind of a throwaway day when looking through the notes that preceded it, as on day 20, ran it through the V60 and it was already significantly better, as it leaned much more into the darker honey components, reminiscent yet again of Fried Hats coffees. And I say that a lot from a lot of the Fried Hats coffees I've reviewed, that they have this kind of darker honey components to them. Definitely experiencing it in this coffee, and that's the secondary reason why it did remind me a lot of Fried Hats coffees, complemented well by slightly more berry-like components to it. Clean and sweet, much better. Enjoyed this coffee, definitely more on this try. Day 22, a surprisingly nice day as the cup continues to trend really well. I think I was already starting to see a significant increase day by day, as the coffee does choke up, so a more coarse grind is going to be helpful with this coffee, and that's why I did go a little bit more coarse when brewing it. It's just really light, and was going to continue adjusting from here, but the honey-like berry tea was present yet again. That's what it reminded me of a lot in these early days, and I think once I did go with a little bit more coarse of a grind, then it was opening up, and as a result, maybe a little bit more tea-like, but from that point going forward, a little bit more robust and vibrant. As on day 24, the more coarse grind did see a nice increase in the sweetness and vibrancy of the cup, reminiscent of Fried Hats coffees yet again, with that darker honey present, and a continuing lively and sweet dark berry aspect to it. The blackberry makes a lot of sense, the pastry sweetness makes a lot of sense, and what I wanted to discuss was that blackberry, because blackberries, really ripe blackberries are actually my favorite berry. It's done, if it's a really ripe one, then it actually has a lot more sweetness, and it still does have a little bit of a tart aspect to it. And that's why I like that they went with blackberry instead of something like a black currant, because it felt a little bit more sweet than the currants can be. And then the pastry that they have listed on here, the pie, yes, very much has a great pastry sweetness to it. It reminds me maybe a little bit more of a Danish, but at the same time, pastry is a pastry, still a sugary pastry. Day 26 continues to emit a well-rounded berry vibrancy, as another good day in terms of the sweetness. There's much more depth to the cup as well, including a slightly lively citrus, as well as the stone fruit component that reminded me a little bit of apricot. Plenty more of that dark honey that's consistent throughout the time drinking this coffee, even from the first day all the way through the last, so experiencing that yet again. Day 28. Standout day to this coffee to this point, as the sweetness really intensified, and there was a wild berry compote component to it. So it was so lively that it had the liveliness of a natural processed coffee, but still maintained all of the clarity of a wash processed coffee. So this attribute was wonderful, as the cup remained still a slightly lighter bodied cup in general, but it was intensely berry sweet, thinking again a very strong and concentrated berry sweet tea with a sweet honey aspect to it. Yet again, really liking it. Another positive day of this coffee. Day 30, the Cup continues to remain the same as it has a wonderful pastry-like sweetness and vibrancy at the forefront of the cup. Wild berries and honey sweetness in this, yet again, listed blackberry note continues to feel apt as there's both a slightly tart and dark and deep sweetness to the cup. Day 32, final day, the cup has remained pretty consistent since that post 4-week mark, so it was good up until that point, but once it reached that 4-week mark, it got significantly better going forward as the berry vibrancy and pastry sweetness continued to be in abundance, plenty of other sweet flavors at the forefront of the cup before settling into this more darker floral honey aspect. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, 5, level 4, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness, level 4. Yeah, super clean cup of coffee, no complaints about the cleanliness. That's the epitome of what a standard wash processed coffee should be. Great in terms of the cleanliness. Finish, level 4. Very even finish, and even then it still does kind of linger a little bit longer, so I think it definitely justifies that level 4 mark as well. Both of those are perfectly at that level 4 mark. Sweetness level 4, and again, we're kind of 3 for 3 in that sense, as that one is, again, the epitome of a level 4. It has wonderful sweetness to this. I've been talking about that throughout the time reviewing this coffee. For a wash processed coffee, it definitely is on the higher end of the sweetness spectrum. Acidity level 4, yeah, and that's what a lot of the finish is, and it's a lot of the brighter aspects of this coffee. It definitely does have a bright acidity to it. I believe that they actually say on their branding that people should not be afraid of acidity. Acidity is not a crime, is what they say on here. And yeah, I can see that, and I have no issue with it as long as it's balanced out nicely by the sweetness, and they did a good job of both of those things. Berry fruit level 4, I've been talking about that a lot. Yes, very much that blackberry that they have listed on here. I think that that's a perfect flavor note to go along with the berry component within this coffee. So no complaints about that. Not necessarily the most lively thing. It would be surprising if it ever hit a level 5 mark, but still a wonderfully clean and sweet berry. Citrus fruit level 3, yeah, it did feel a little citric at times, but nothing too overly distinct or prominent, and I would definitely say it was in secondary measure to the very lively berry component. Stone fruit, ever so slight, did mention time to time I was able to get a light bit of apricot. The body is what was kind of interesting. I mean, this still is a Colombian coffee, and it was brewed through the V60, and even then it did have a little bit of a lighter body. I think that just does go in line with how light this coffee was roasted. A slight bit of savoriness, yeah, and then the florality is at a level 3. That's the only thing I think is really worth discussing on here, because I've been hinting at a lot of the floral honey components to this cup. Very much present, probably the secondary factor for me in terms of the pastry sweetness as well as the berry sweetness. It's at least a tertiary factor, but very dominant at times, arguably the most pronounced characteristic in this cup. So something I really enjoyed from it, as all of the flavors that came from this cup were things that I really enjoyed. So I really like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think they did a really good job. Well, I think this is a really good representation of what I was experiencing from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is really positive. This is actually one of the better standard wash processed coffees from any origin I've had this year. It's not one of those that I think is necessarily top 10 worthy, but it definitely put House of Funk back on the map for me, because while I didn't like their initial experimental coffee, I think that if you can kind of get your bread and butter down really well, your more standard processed coffees really well done, then I'm going to be more inclined to want to try your experimental coffees, your higher end coffees. And this one being on the better side of that standard wash processed coffee spectrum, that's going to be a nice selling point to me, and something that definitely catches my interest about their coffees in the future. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you like the bright acidity, if you still need the cleanliness from your cup while not sacrificing any of the sweetness, I think this is a wonderful fit for you, as this one right here, definitely on the lighter side of that spectrum, had so many of those characteristics I very much enjoy. I always say if you can hit those marks, cleanliness, sweetness, florality, and some sort of fruit vibrancy, then you're doing a very good job. This coffee had all 4 of those things, and while they weren't necessarily in an overly pronounced sense, they were still very much present in all of those components. So for those reasons, if those are what you're looking for in a coffee, I think this one is a really nice fit. For the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from House of Funk, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Blackberry Pie Wash Process Colombia from House of Funk. Thank you for watching.